Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. It's time we get back to the lake and then get away from the lake as we follow the devil to the west coast. So, don your masks and grab your knives. It's time we embark on a journey that Doughboy420 has laid out for us with Obituary 3, Sympathy for the Devil.
Lillian once again left town, giving her mother credit for putting a stop to the mastermind behind the obituary killings. The woman returned to her new home, far, far away from Locust Lake, and what happened there. Washington State was on the complete opposite end of the United States, and yet her cottage, near to the Washogal River, reminded her very much of the town that she had escaped from. Though the trees were bigger and the terrain more mountainous, the area resembled the area where she was born, in a small town next to the Susquehanna River in northeastern Pennsylvania. Outside the hustle and bustle of Vancouver and Portland, in the deep forest, in a place that is most known for Bigfoot sightings and the infamous D.B. Cooper hijacking. But that was a long time ago, and the place was now quiet and remote, with little to no cell phone service. She liked it that way. She felt safer there. But her quiet little world would soon be turned upside down. Time passed, and she once again put the horrors of Locust Lake and the wretched little area around it in her past. She was happy again with years of peace and quiet. Lillian was on her way home from work at the coffee shop in a little town nearby. The Pacific Northwest is pretty well known for being fond of coffee, considering the birthplace of Starbucks was just a couple hours north in Seattle. She was a few minutes into her drive when she was stopped by traffic. Cars were lined up for quite a way down the road, and a cacophony of car horns could be heard sounding off at the annoyance of being held up from getting home. "What the hell's going on?" Lillian asked, no one in particular, as she rounded a corner, allowing the source of the traffic jam to come into view. Cars were slowly passing a house that was swarming with police and EMTs. Yellow tape had been drawn out along the entire front of the property. Red and blue lights flashed, and people gawked, hoping they could see a body being carried away. And sure enough, as Lillian was passing, she saw 2 body bags being wheeled out on stretchers. She felt uncomfortable at first, reminded of her past, of what she had done, and what she had escaped from. But then, with some time, that too would pass. Lillian pulled her blue Honda Civic into the little gravel driveway in front of her cottage by the river, turned the car off, and went inside. After a quick shower, she got dressed, poured herself a nice glass of red wine, and stepped out onto her back deck that stood tall, overlooking the rapids of the Washogal River. She calmly sipped her wine, enjoying the peace that came with the sound of rushing water below and the beautiful view of the forested Washington landscape all around her. She sat for several minutes before the silence was broken when her cell phone rang. It wasn't out of the ordinary for the two to go several weeks without talking, but it had been nearly 2 months since she had last heard from her mother, so it was quite a delightful surprise to see her number pop up. With glee, Lillian picked up the phone and tapped to answer the call. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" Lillian said with a smile.
"I'm sorry your mother can't come to the phone right now, Lillian."
A deep, ominous voice spoke from the other end. "Very funny, Mom. When did you get a voice modifier?" Lillian asked.
"I got it before I gutted your mom like the lying cow that she was."
The voice growled back at her. "Who is this?" Lillian asked, her tone changing to one of concern. "Where's my mom?" she continued.
"I took a little trip to camp and ditched the body where no one would dare to look."
The voice spoke once more. "I'll fucking kill you, you piece of shit!" Lillian yelled.
"Tisk, tisk, temper, temper. Enjoy your wine and have a good night, because it may be the last peaceful one you get,"
the voice said, before the call cut out. Lillian immediately looked out into the darkening forest as the sun set down the valley of the river. She didn't see anything, but she knew someone was watching her. Quickly, she made her way inside and through her house, making sure everything was secure before she pulled a rifle out of her bedroom closet, where she kept it loaded and at the ready in case her past ever caught up to her, and this was just such an occasion. After feeling sufficiently prepared, she shielded herself behind a desk in her bedroom and dialed her mother's number. The phone rang several times, and for a while, she thought that her call was being ignored. But then, the ominous voice picked up once more.
"A gun didn't protect your nosy neighbors, and it won't protect you either,"
the voice growled at her. Lillian looked up to her bedroom window to see a blur of black and white, followed by her firing off a shot in that direction, shattering her window, before she got up and ran toward the broken glass, where she could only see the darkened forest, just barely lit by the sun over the horizon. For the rest of the night, she sat with one hand on her gun. She didn't get any rest, not while she was being watched by a psychopath from her past. Who could it be, she thought, remembering back to her life in Halstead. She thought about Jason, Doug, and Sawyer, but they were all dead. It couldn't be any of them. She tried to read through the letters and saved emails that her family had sent her over the years, but nothing really stood out to her. She never spent very long looking at her research material before glancing up at the window and entryway to make sure that no one was coming for her, but she was ready for it, in case it did. Morning finally came, and Lillian was able to feel relatively safe once again. But she now had to get ready for work in a few hours, and she didn't have time to rest after the sleepless night. After doing her usual morning routine, she made her way to work at the local coffee shop in town. The bigger chains had yet to move into their little neck of the woods, so brewed dude coffee was what she had to make do with. It was a tiny walk-in shop that didn't even have a drive-thru, but her co-workers were all pretty nice, and the locals had stopped in on a daily basis. They were all great people as well. But when she got to work, she could already tell that the aura was off in the place. A trio of girls were being loud and obnoxious in a booth in the corner of the shop. It was early, and these girls were obviously from out of town. They all ordered things that were more like desserts than coffee, and their behavior just made Lillian uncomfortable. "Out-of-towners?" Lillian asked her friend Jenny as she set her purse down in the cubby in the back room. "Yeah, some rich kids from back east. I guess they have, like, An internet show or something? My sister watches them, Jenny answered, revealing the small-time celebrity nature of the annoying and affluent young ladies. Why would they come here of all places? Lillian questioned. I don't know. Rich people like quaint little towns, Jenny said, with a disgusted shrug. Oh my God! Lillian? Lillian Harris? Asked one of the girls. Lillian froze. No one could possibly know who she was, but here was this girl calling out her name. No, I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong person, Lillian lied. Oh, come on, Lil. I know it's you. My brother went to school with your sister, the girl continued. Oh, hi, Lillian greeted the girl. So, this is where you've been all this time? Asked the girl. Yeah? What did you say your name was? Lillian asked. Kirsty Spencer, the girl answered. Doug Spencer's your brother? Lillian asked with a knot in her throat. Yeah? But we don't talk about him. Sorry, Kirsty explained with empathy. It's okay, Lillian said, unsure of what to make of the whole situation. But the more she thought about it, the more it hit her. It couldn't be a coincidence that Kirsty was here and the murders were springing up once again. What brings you out here? Lillian asked. I've been traveling with my parents and filming it for my channel. Maybe you've heard of it? I have like thousands of subscribers, Kirsty said with a proud smile. H-Town Girl 01? She asked. No, sorry. Maybe it's just because I'm way out here in the West Coast. I'm sure you're super popular, though, Lillian assured the girl. It's all good. What's new with you? You like living out here? Kirsty asked. Had to get away. I'm sure you know what I mean, Lillian explained. Yeah, sorry. Didn't mean to open old wounds, Kirsty said. No, it's all right. No worries, Lillian reassured her. Hey, I gotta get back to work. It was nice seeing you. Lillian tried to separate herself from the situation. Oh, hey, Lil, my friends and I are gonna have a little party in our motel room down the road. You wanna come over? And maybe catch up a little more? The younger girl asked. What was her game? She was over 2 decades younger than Lillian, and the two had never met. What could there be to possibly catch up on? Yeah, sure, Lillian agreed. Maybe she could find out more about what was going on, and either way, she'd be able to keep an eye on the one that she believed to be the new killer in town. Okay, cool. Room number 3, Kirsty said with a smile, offering her a handshake. Cool. I'll see you there, Lillian answered, shaking the girl's hand, even though inside, she knew that she was being taunted by a murderer. After work, Lillian went home to get cleaned up and get ready to go out. For any other situation, that would be a normal thing, but this was not any other situation. This was very specific. She was on a mission to find out more. When Lillian arrived at the motel, she found that there were many more people there beyond the 3 girls. There were many other people that they had invited from town as well. Hey there, Mama. How you doing? A young man said as he slid up beside her. I'm not your mama, and I'm not interested in kids with mommy kinks either. Lillian smirked and walked off. I don't have a... The boy started to argue, but stormed off to find another girl to bother instead. There were about 24 people that partied inside and spilled out into the parking lot, while a very annoyed-looking hotel manager, probably in her 60s, sat in the office, scowling out the window as the people continued to arrive. Hey, girl, how's it going? Kirsty greeted Lillian as she entered. Hey. This is quite the party you've got going on here. Lillian spoke up over the music as she scanned around the party, taking note of everyone there and every exit to the room. "Yeah, you know guys out west really know how to party. Woo!" she replied with a drunken cheer, getting an eruption of hoots and howls in return. "Hey, you showed. You want a beer?" A dark-haired girl that Lillian recognized as one of the friends that had been sitting next to Christy. "Yeah, sure," Lillian accepted. The girl frolicked over to a keg nearby, her charm bracelet tinkering as she danced over to grab a red plastic cup from the table beside it in order to pour the guest a beer, and she was all too happy to do so. Lillian realized the obvious fact that the girl was high on something when she handed her the beer. A wide-eyed look with a toothy grin stretched her face as wide as limits would allow. Thanks," Lillian said, a bit weirded out by the almost unnatural-looking smile. "No problem, girl," she replied before dancing off into a crowd of people. "That's Jenica. Don't mind her. She's really rolling right now," Christy replied with a hiccup. She was obviously trashed, or at least she wanted Lillian to believe that she was. "Aren't you here with your parents?" Lillian asked. "What do they think about all this?" She continued. They took a trip down to Multnomah Falls," Kirsty replied. "Multnomah Falls?" Lillian corrected her. "Yeah, that. My dad's probably getting my mom some new jewelry or something like that. Whatever. What they don't know won't hurt them," Kirsty answered. It was then that Lillian was startled by a commotion outside. A chorus of screams rang out, causing the woman on edge to charge outside to see what all the yelling was about. Outside, she found a large group of teenagers gathered around a pair of boys duking it out and slinging insults at each other, along with the swinging fists, while their girlfriends were trying to get them to stop their display of testosterone-fueled aggression. Lillian sighed with relief. It was a false alarm, but her ease was soon broken by a second group of screams, followed by a group of people charging past her as they fled in fear. When the people cleared the area, Lillian spotted a dead body. Her upper torso lay on the edge of the pavement of the parking lot, while her legs were curled up in the grass. Her stomach was ripped open, and she laid on her side with her intestines spilling out of her carved-out core. "Damn it," Lillian growled to herself. Then, more screams came as people poured out from inside the motel, all of them running for their lives. Back inside, Lillian found Jenica, the girl that she had met earlier, her body sprawled out on the bed, riddled with stab wounds, her stomach ripped open, blood soaking into the white bed sheets. Lillian scanned the room, hoping to find the murderer, but instead, she heard stirring in the closed bathroom. The woman grabbed a hold of the bedside lamp and ripped the cord out of the wall in the process, followed by tearing the lampshade off and flipping it over to use it as a bar as she approached the bathroom door. Lillian grasped the handle and swung open the door. She raised the bat and swung at the first sign of movement, narrowly missing the young, blonde girl that sat huddled by the sink of the small room. "No, please, stop! Don't kill me!" Kirsty screamed, protecting herself with her hands and shivering with terror. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Lillian asked, still brandishing the lamp in the air above her, ready to swing. "What does it look like? I'm freaking hiding. A guy in a black coat and a devil mask ran inside and started stabbing." Kirsty stopped, her eyes tearing up as she realized her friend's fate. "Papier-mâché?" Lillian asked. Kirsty gave a nod in response. Lillian wasn't sure about Kirsty. It appeared as though she'd not brutally murdered her friend, and Lillian couldn't prove otherwise, so for the time being, she chose to continue to handle Kirsty with caution. If she kept an eye on the girl, then perhaps she could prevent any more deaths, or, at the very least, prove one way or the other if Kirsty was indeed the culprit. Maybe she was relying on sympathy for clicks. killing off her friends and then living off the empathy of others that viewed her streams and videos. Maybe she was jealous of her brother and wanted to top his kill count. Or perhaps, maybe Lillian was just being paranoid and all this was merely coincidence. All these obsessive thoughts crossed her mind as she helped the girl out of the motel and into her old Jeep. She didn't want to be there when the police arrived, and she believed she had the culprit, and all was going relatively according to plan, aside from the few hiccups of dead guests. She figured she'd be able to handle it from here on out, until she turned the key to her Jeep, and only clicking came, as the engine would not turn over. "Shit!" Lillian growled at the dead battery. "Follow me," the woman commanded the younger girl, leading her into the check-in lobby in hopes that she'd be able to come up with a new plan. Perhaps she could convince the motel manager that she had previously spotted to help her escape. The door swung open to an empty office. No one was at the counter. The same older woman that Lillian had seen earlier was nowhere to be found. Maybe she too had fled the scene. "Hello?" Lillian called out, ready to defend herself at any moment. No answer came. "Excuse me, is anyone here?" Lillian politely called out. Still no reply. The girls made their way around the counter to gain access to the room behind it. The door was ajar by just a crack, but when Lillian pushed it open, she was met with a horrific sight. Inside, they found the older woman gasping and struggling with a black gloved hand wrapped around her throat, fingers digging tightly against her, blood running down her cheek where an earring had been torn from her ear. A hook knife was then drawn upward and driven into her torso. Kirsty screamed and ran outside upon seeing the graphic scene, alerting the masked killer to their presence. The familiar, menacing face of a devilish mask, plastered together with the obituaries of past victims of massacres from over 3,000 miles away. Obituaries of the Locust Lake killings. Lillian stood there in stupefied shock. Kirsty wasn't the killer, but the real devil-faced slasher was now standing directly in front of her, knife dripping with blood. Then came a familiar look, a familiar taunt, as the obituary killer tilted the knife from side to side, as if to say, "No, no." The masked man then charged at her, knife raised overhead. He slashed downward at the girl, but she was able to slam the door shut on his hand, temporarily disarming him and giving Lillian enough time to get away as the murderer recovered. "Kirsty!" Lillian yelled out after making her way outside once more. There was no answer. The terrified girl was probably long gone by now, and Lillian quickly came to the same conclusion. So she picked a direction and ran as fast as she could, away from the motel and away from the approaching police sirens. The girl ran through the darkness, moving near to the road, but just far enough away from the road's edge to not be seen by any passing vehicles. Eventually, she found herself crossing onto another dirt path, a long driveway that led onto a field where a fairly large house sat, all lit up inside. Lillian didn't want to ask for help, but she didn't have much choice. She'd been very careful, extra careful. She'd registered the Jeep under a fake name. Her home was fake. Her identity was fake. Everything about her was a falsehood that she put herself in to keep anyone from finding out the truth. Her real identity. Her real past. But even so, even though that she'd done everything she possibly could to keep herself a secret, she still had a family. And the attacker struck there first, using her mother to get to her, as Jason Hodder had tried to do previously. But where he failed, this masked devil succeeded. "Hello?" Lillian called out. "I need some help, please." She further added, "This is private property. Please leave." A man's voice came from a doorbell camera beside the door. "Can I just use your phone, please? My car broke down near the end of your driveway and my cell's dead. Please, I won't be long." Lillian begged to be let inside. After a long silence, The door swung open, and a man in his 30s opened the door. He brushed his shoulder-length hair over his right ear and looked Lillian in the eye. "Phone's down the hall, to the left. Don't dilly-dally," the man grumbled, allowing the woman into his home. Lillian hastily made her way to the room with the phone down the hall, hoping to call a friend from work to pick her up, but something caught her eye along the way. A framed picture hung on the wall to show a happy family on a fishing trip. A mother, a father, and a very familiar-looking teenage girl. It was Jenica, the same young girl that lay dead and eviscerated upon a motel bed just down the road. Lillian felt guilty as she gazed upon the photo. This girl was dead because of her, because she chose to move here and bring the curse of Locust Lake along with her. Everything that place touches rots, and everything that she touches turns to shit. A vile combination that spilled forth like putrid excrement and caused death and dismay in its wake. Lillian turned the corner and entered the small office with a telephone on the desk. She reached for the phone, and it began to ring, which startled her for a moment. She waited a few more seconds and let it ring. She thought about going to get the owner of the home, but soon the ringing stopped. She shrugged it off and reached for the telephone once more, and once again, it started ringing. Lillian picked up the phone and put it to her ear.
"Tisk, tisk. You got all those people killed, but I doubt you care. You're a cold-blooded killer, just like me."
The familiar, modified voice spoke from the other end of the line. "What? How did you know I was here?" Lillian asked in shock.
"I've got you, Lillian. I've been a few steps ahead the whole time, watching your every move, planning your downward spiral. Like a cat with a mouse, I like to play with my kill."
The modified voice of the obituary killer taunted her before the phone cut off. Then, before Lillian could even return the phone to its receiver, she was startled by a frantic knocking at the door. The owner of the home entered through the room and to the door to open it. "No, wait!" Lillian called out, fearing that he was allowing the murderer into his home. "Oh, thank God, Mr. Scott!" A familiar voice called out as a small figure jumped through the open door and hugged the man tightly. It was Kirsty Spencer. She too had found her way to the home. "Oh, hello, Miss Spencer. Where's Jenica?" The man, obviously Jenica's father, asked, and in that moment, the poor girl burst into tears and profusely apologized, leaving the poor man confused as to what she was saying, not entirely understanding right away what had happened. And before the clarity could come any further, the lights went dark as all the electricity in the home went out, causing Kirsty to scream with fright. "What's going on?" Jenica's mother asked as she came out from the living room to the left and into the entryway. Then, in from the still open front door, came the robed, dark figure, his white, devilish mask the only thing piercing the darkness, and in that instant, a hook knife was driven into the stomach of the older woman. It then ripped up through her torso, causing blood to flow from her like a waterfall. The sanguine fluid ran down the blade and across its handle before dripping down the charm bracelet trophy that he had fastened to the base of the hilt. "Cassandra!" her husband yelled as he ran to her aid, and in doing so, the man opened himself to an attack. The masked killer withdrew his blade from the woman's body before slashing outward at the incoming man, slicing across his stomach. But the man was able to deliver a punch to the papier-mâché mask, denting it inward and covering it with the blood of its wearer before tossing him out the door and slamming it shut, locking it behind the murderer. He stood there against the thick wooden door for a moment, holding his wound, as it appeared as though he was deep in thought about something, looking around, confused. Are you all right, Mr. Scott?" Kirsty asked him. I need to be alone. Please, leave me be," the older man said after scooping up his deceased wife. He then walked slowly into the next room. "Don't leave me out here," Kirsty yelled with fear. "Leave me be," the man demanded, closing the door behind him. "He's injured. It's going to be hard for him to see us with a broken face." Lillian finally made her presence known. "Lil, what are you doing here?" Kirsty yelled in surprise. "I ran away from him, and I ended up here," Lillian replied. Kirsty hugged her friend tightly, glad to see someone she knew. "What are we going to do?" Kirsty then asked. It was then that Kirsty's cell phone rang. "Oh, thank God! The signal in this place sucks!" Kirsty exclaimed before answering her cell, followed by a look of immediate shock and fear. "It's for you," Kirsty said quietly, as she handed the phone to Lillian and sat down on one of the steps leading upstairs, staring at the front door, terrified out of her mind. "Hello?" Lillian answered.
The old man shouldn't have done that. Now I'm gonna have to gut you all like I did his daughter,"
the disguised voice on the other end taunted. "Go to hell, asshole!" Lillian growled.
"You know,"
the voice began,
"that's a really nice picture of a family. I wonder if they caught any fish. I know I'll catch what I came for."
The modified voice continued to harass her. "The only thing you'll catch is a knife to the neck," Lillian yelled into the phone and immediately spun around to find the crushed, white mask of the devil, with blood dripping from the crack that Mr. Scott had delivered. The obituary killer stepped out from inside the room Lillian had previously been in. Kirsty screamed as the killer charged at Lillian. The woman grabbed a hold of his wrists to keep him from driving the knife into her. She struggled desperately to fight off her attacker while Kirsty looked on, not knowing what to do. Lillian managed to get the upper hand when her fight was interrupted by the sudden sound of a motor starting up, followed by the door that Mr. Scott had locked behind him being kicked in, slamming it open, where Mr. Scott charged the masked killer, driving the end of a chainsaw into his stomach as he screamed and swung his hook knife at his attacker, who was just out of reach. The man simply reached out and snatched the charm bracelet from the base of the handle as he drove the chainsaw blade further on and out through his back, sending chunks of gore flying all over the wall behind him. The grieving father and widower reached out and pulled the broken mask off the man's face without saying a word. "Dad?" Kirsty said in absolute astonished shock, seeing her father's lifeless eyes as the mask was removed from his face. "You brought him here! You knew!" Lillian yelled, knowing that she was guilty as she approached Kirsty, ready to fight. I didn't know! I didn't know! Please!" Kirsty begged, crawling backwards away from Lillian. The tension was then interrupted by the sound of a screaming woman as a second obituary killer crashed into the room, jumping onto Mr. Scott's back and stabbing him repeatedly in the neck, sending an arterial coating of paint onto the walls and stairs. Kirsty knew who was behind that mask. It was obvious now. "Why?" was all Kirsty could muster up. "Your brother was right. That place is corrupt. By hiding the truth of all the murders that took place around that damned lake, they doomed generation after generation of victims. The blood of countless people is on their hands, and in doing this, we're forcing these secrets to come to light." Kirsty's mother answered as she removed the mask and set it aside upon a small hallway table. "So, you think killing more people is the way to bring this all out? Because why? Because Dougie said so? Dougie was crazy, Mom!" Kirsty roared back. "No. Don't you see, baby? Doug was right. And now we finished what he started. Now, with us being far away from that wretched grasp of the vile, putrid little town, now their secrets will come to surface. Finally, their darkness will come to light," Kirsty's mother explained. "Mom," Kirsty began, but was quickly interrupted, for Lillian had managed to pull the hook knife from the fingers of Kirsty's dead father, where she then charged the distracted mother and drove the knife into the woman's neck, where she twisted it sideways before ripping it out, blood gushing from the wound. Kirsty froze in shock as her mother's blood poured over her. She just stood there and stared, blood running down her face and soaking her clothing. "I'm sorry. It had to be done," Lillian said, genuinely trying to be empathetic to the girl, but Kirsty gave no response. She just stared at her mother's corpse as the life fully left her eyes. Lillian wiped her fingerprints off the knife and placed it in Mr. Scott's hand before heading into the office to wipe prints from the telephone. "We gotta go. I moved out here to get away from all this. I want no part of it, any of it. So please, don't tell anyone about me, okay?" Lillian begged. "Okay." Kirsty mumbled out an agreement and nodded, still shocked by what had just transpired. "I guess this is goodbye. Unless you have an uncle that's gonna pop out and try and kill me." Lillian chuckled, but got no response from Kirsty. "Sorry. I shouldn't joke about that. My bad. Bye." Lillian waved and walked away to resume her quiet life in the forests of southern Washington, leaving Kirsty to deal with the fallout. After answering all the questions sufficiently, and leaving out certain events, of course, she was allowed to go free, where she could return home to Pennsylvania. Kirsty had been through hell, and now was the last member of her family left alive. She decided to take her time getting home and give herself some time to think about all that had happened, and what she would do now that her life was entirely different and that she was on her own. Instead of buying a plane ticket, she opted instead to take a bus and spend a few days crossing the country and seeing the sights. She sat on the bus, toward the back, in a seat all to herself, and as she sat there, she pondered what had happened, gripping her backpack close to her where she opened it and peered inside. A white mask with horns and a horrible smile with words and pictures. Victims of the Locust Lake killings. 2 devilish eyes stared back at her from inside her bag. Her plan had gone mostly how she wanted. She had successfully convinced her parents to hunt down the girl that got their son killed. She didn't expect them to kick the bucket. "Oh well," she thought to herself. "If you want to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs."
That just goes to show you, you can run from the devil, but the devil will always find you. And don't forget to find me again next weekend, right here, for more gore galore. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.